Cross-cultural partnerships can be very challenging, particularly when it comes to money. For example, a church or an individual overseas has a vision for ministry, and a church or individual in the West has the finances to help, and it looks like a good match. It's amazing and saddening, however, to see how quickly good ideas and good intentions can turn into fiasco and disappointment. So how can we do better? That's our topic today on the Global Missions Podcast.
Welcome to the Global Missions Podcast, a podcast for Christ followers who want to participate more effectively in God's work both at home and to the ends of the earth. Visit us at globalmissionspodcast.com to find show notes, resources, and previous episodes. Here's your host, Rob Magwood, better known to his friends as Mags.
Hi everyone, we are glad that you've joined us today. Our guest is Mary Lederleitner, the author of a great book entitled Cross-Cultural Partnerships, Navigating the Complexities of Money and Mission. I've really appreciated the humble tone which Mary uses to address a number of really important issues. This will be relevant to churches and to missions committees as we try to build healthy cross-cultural partnerships. Before we get to the interview, we'd like to share with you this missions resource.
As the church, we desire to help people. We have outreach ministries to our communities, hoping to reach out to their spiritual needs, but also their physical and emotional needs. But does our helping ever hurt? If you're wondering how to improve your outreach programs so that they bring dignity and empowerment to those in need, you need to read Helping Without Hurting. Visit our resource page at the Global Missions Podcast to learn more about this insightful book. And now, here's our interview with today's expert guest.
Hello again, everyone. I am very pleased to welcome you to today's expert interview with our guest, Mary Lederleitner. I'd like to take just a minute to introduce you to Mary. She is a researcher and an author and a trainer and consultant for Wycliffe Global Alliance. And one of her focuses is best practices related to cross-cultural ministry partnerships. She has a PhD from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in the Chicago area, where she lives with her husband, John, and she has developed many resources to train both missionaries and lay people for cross-cultural ministry. She is the author of a book we want to discuss today. It's entitled Cross-Cultural Partnerships. Mary, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks so much.
Glad to have you. And just before we dive into today's main topic, would you please just tell us a little bit about yourself and how the Lord led you to be passionate about missions?
Sure. I think it started when I was very young. I had an uncle. He was my grandfather's brother, who was a Franciscan priest, and he was a missionary in China. And in his ministry, he ran an orphanage, and they would often collect young baby girls who were abandoned, and they would bring them to the orphanage and raise them. And he was taken as a prisoner of war in World War II, and he almost died, but he ended up making it. And his story seemed to pull at that initial calling in my heart for missions. Later, as I grew up, I became a Christian right before I went to college, and Urbana was very influential in 1981 at helping me understand missions and the scope of missions. And I think a number of churches just kind of fanned those flames, that passion for mission. And then a church I was involved in my 20s had a really powerful singles ministry called Ambassadors. And it was really focused on helping young adults find their calling and support one another in God's calling on their life. And at that point, really in my late 20s, early 30s, was when I finally made a decision to go into full-time ministry. So since that time, I went on and got more education, and I've served with Wycliffe now for almost 20 years.
Mary, one of your specialties is cross-cultural partnerships, and that's what we want to focus on today. Partnership is a very rich, broad word, though. It means a lot of different things to different people. Could you take a minute and just define partnerships for us for the context of this discussion?
When I use the term partnership in the book, and we talk about it today, I'm meaning people coming together who share a common passion for what they're trying to accomplish together. And there is equal planning and mutuality, and everyone has voice in what happens and in how decisions are made. So that's the type of partnership I'm talking about when I speak about ministry partnerships and when I share stories and advice
Hmm.
and ideas.
We want to look at some of the benefits of cross-cultural partnerships. I wonder if you would just speak to that a little bit. What are some of the benefits of cross-cultural partnerships?
Well, I think that most people enter partnership primarily for pragmatic reasons. Often they're hitting a roadblock in ministry. They want to reach more people or plant more churches or have a more extensive reach with evangelism or serve the poor in a community in a richer way, and they hit roadblocks because they have limited staffing or limited resources or that sort of thing, and they kind of realize, wow, if we partner together, we could do more. And so I think that that's often the inroad
Hmm.
to partnering. But I think what's lost or what people don't understand is there are much deeper benefits. A famous missiologist, Paul Hebert, once said that people from other cultures can see our sins easier than we can see our own. And when we work in other cultures, we can sometimes see their sins easier than they can see their own. I think that cross-cultural partnerships could actually foster a much more profound and rich form of discipleship. And I also find myself thinking a lot of times of the passage in Revelation 5, 8, and 9, where it talks about how people from every tongue and tribe and nation are together worshiping the Lamb. And in in eternity, we will be about our Father's business together for all eternity. And when we think of passages like when Jesus was teaching his disciples to pray, and he said, "Pray that thy kingdom come and thy will would be done on earth as it is in heaven." We see that glimpse in heaven of what will be done or what is being done, and I think that these cross-cultural partnerships are a chance to begin developing for our eternal calling of working with people from all kinds of tribes and nations and cultures and being about the Father's business
Hmm.
together. So I think it's pragmatic, but I think it's far deeper than that. And a lot of times, if we don't remember that, we sometimes don't have the capacity we need to overcome challenges we face along the way.
Hmm. In your book on cross-cultural partnerships, you use an illustration from the former Soviet Union where my wife and I and family had an opportunity to serve years ago. And we observed some of what you related in that illustration, that there were good intentions on both sides of a cross-cultural partnership, but that those partnerships didn't always reach full fruition. What are some of the elements that you have observed in culture that are at risk of contributing to misunderstandings?
When social scientists talk about culture, they often talk about elements of culture or dimensions of culture. And what you'll find is often there in each of these areas, there's a spectrum. And so, like one element or dimension would be the spectrum between collectivism and individualism. And whenever partners are at different places on that spectrum, they're often going to have different expectations of the partnership, of what their partner is going to do or not do. And if those expectations aren't understood, it can cause conflict in the partnership and possibly even cause it to end, and sometimes end poorly. So, with collectivism and individualism, that plays a big role in terms of sharing resources, sharing money, because often in a collectivistic culture, resources belong to everyone and everyone has a claim on those, or they're shared very broadly. In an individualistic culture, it's much more personal and you keep control of your own resources, and it isn't something that belongs to everyone. So that can cause all kinds of issues. There's also issues with power. Many cultures are hierarchical, and there are a few people that have power, but those people have responsibility to lots of other people to help them in many different ways. Other cultures are more egalitarian and they share power, and that difference can cause a lot of confusion, because if you have kind of a hierarchical culture and status is very important, um, but you come in a very egalitarian way and you try to call everybody by similar names with no titles without treating them differently, it can actually cause a lot of hurt sometimes and misunderstandings. And there are other things like high context and low context communication, which can really cause a significant problem where in many cultures, they're high context communication cultures. And what it means is that not as much value is placed on words, and especially not much value is placed on written words. The true communication lies in all of the nonverbal behaviors and expressions and patterns. But other cultures, especially North America, is very low context, and you can tell a low context culture because often they have a high number of lawyers
Uh-huh.
and they focus very much on written contracts and written agreements and communicating in writing. Well, a lot of times a low context culture can disrespect a high context culture because they don't understand the benefit of a high context culture. I mean, in many parts of the world, you can't speak directly, or you'll be killed or imprisoned, or bad things will happen in the community.
Hmm.
So these nonverbal ways of expressing yourself are actually very effective. There are many different
Hmm.
areas of culture, and each of these often like have a spectrum
Right.
of ways people perceive it, and all of that really impacts
Hmm.
cross-cultural partnership.
Well, as we try and to bring this to a practical level for a missions committee who's wrestling with a potential new cross-cultural partnership, what are some of the common difficulties or hurdles that a missions committee would need to be aware of as they consider one of these partnerships?
Well, I think if you take initially the individualistic versus collectivistic spectrum, what's happening is often a church, or maybe even a few individuals in that church give money for a certain project, and that donor designation follows that project. And the money is given then often in a setting where it might be collectivistic. Oftentimes, churches in North America don't realize the pressure that's on that partner once money comes into their setting. Often, there can be all kinds of pressures from relatives, from people in the community, from other church initiatives to lay claim or access that funding. Um, and it's very easy to be judgmental of that and think, oh, there's just not good accountability, or oh, they're just not trustworthy. The money is spent for something different. But it's not that at all. A lot of times we're not helping people to think through and prepare for these pressures. ahead of time. We just assume that when we send money, it will be handled the exact same way. When money comes into our churches for a certain specific purpose, we don't experience often all of this extra pressure. And so we just assume that what we're experiencing is what they're experiencing. So
Mhm.
there needs to be much more discussion and dialogue up front to understand what the context is going to be like. What are the pressures this partner is going to face? How do those partners on the receiving end of that funding role play or develop a strategy before the money even comes to help ensure that the funding accomplishes the purpose that it's being given for?
Right.
So that's one area. On the okay, the high status or
Mhm.
the high context, low context, and if you think of the status question, hierarchical or not, a lot of times we want written reports,
Mhm.
and very possibly the funding is being given to an oral culture. Not just that, but often we want the reports in English, or maybe you want it in French in some parts of Canada. And those languages might be your partner's second, third, or fourth language.
Right.
So when they have to sit down and write a report, it takes so long. It's not like writing a report here.
Mhm.
It can take so long. Not just that, but if they're writing the report in their third or fourth language, they often feel very embarrassed that the way they're writing it is like how a child would write. So there can be a lot of shame and embarrassment uh, around writing a report. Then you add to it the fact that it's a collectivistic culture and there's all kinds of things going on and all kinds of people are putting demands on them. It's easy to get so busy and not sit down and take all this extra time to write the report. Well, what happens then is the missions committee in North America sometimes can be left feeling like, oh, they're not accountable. We're not getting these reports.
Mhm.
But churches in North America could work out other processes. They could actually have somebody on their missions committee who has a Skype conversation or a FaceTime conversation with the partner,
Mhm.
and they just talk and they share and they can record that conversation. And then the mission committee person can put it into writing
Mhm.
fairly quickly in
Mhm.
whatever template or format is standardized by the church or the missions committee. And by doing that, they can help the partner not to lose face, not to be embarrassed, not to be ashamed. They can actually create a more efficient system so more of the partner's time is spent in ministry instead of laboring over a written report that's very difficult often
Sure.
for them to write.
Yeah.
So that would be one way to approach it.
Yeah. What a helpful example. I heard underlying here a real caution about our assumptions. We assume, and if we're not careful, there's a risk that we will just assume that they think like we do, or that their reporting system looks similar to our reporting system. Maybe it's a different language, granted, but and what I hear you saying is that that is not necessarily the case.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I think that's why it's so important to talk through things, slow down and really talk through things carefully at the beginning so that there's as much understanding as possible before sending any money. So oftentimes we send money very quickly, and then when things don't go well, we get so upset and so frustrated, and we believe the worst in other people. And often the intentions are good, the heart is good.
Hmm.
There are just cultural issues at play, but there's ways to navigate those. And when they're navigated well, things can go so well. Um, but a lot of people want to skip that initial phase of
Hmm.
really understanding, and you'll just pay for that time. It'll
Hmm.
take 5 times as long later to sort through all the difficulties that arise because there's not enough cultural understanding.
You've mentioned discussion here. We need to talk together. Are there any other principles that you would suggest that missions committees think about as they step toward cross-cultural partnerships?
I think it's really good to make sure that every major group that's involved in the partnership has committed one person to be like the partnership champion for that initiative. The reason being is that our lives get really busy, and this is just one of many things probably happening in a mission committee or in a church or in a ministry. And if you don't have one person who that's their primary responsibility, even if the partnership gets off to a really wonderful start, there won't be attention to the maintenance pieces that need to happen so that it can flourish over the long haul. Another part that I think uh, can be really helpful is if you also set up times to just pray together, where when you're communicating, it's not always just about the task or it's not always just about reporting, but you have a process of just relating and being brothers and sisters in Christ together. I think a lot of times we're so task oriented that we're missing some of the richer parts of what could happen in our partnerships and the mutual encouragement and the mutual discipleship that could
Hmm.
happen. So those are some of the things. I can give you more, but I know that there's probably time constraints as
Well,
far as
I'll
other
say this
questions you have.
just as a reminder to those who are listening that we're taking show notes. And if you'd like to review some of these ideas and maybe even some of the other ideas that you have, Mary, we'd be glad to include those in the show notes. Mary, one of the words that we sometimes hear, especially when we refer to money in missions, is dependence. And it's often a negative word. Maybe I should say unhealthy dependence. What do we mean now in missions by this term dependence, and what advice do you have for us here in North America as we work in these partnerships with good intentions? How can we be careful to avoid unhealthy dependence?
Yeah, I really appreciate you making the difference in the terminology because so many times people speak of dependence or dependency and they always assume that it's bad. But if we look at passages like Romans 12 or 1 Corinthians 12, we see that we're all part of the body of Christ,
Yes.
and not one of us is self-sufficient. And so an idea that somehow independence is the cherished value, I really question if that's biblical at all. I don't think it is.
Hmm.
But what we don't want is we don't want unhealthy dependency, and that's usually defined as what happens with people psychologically, where they no longer believe that they can take any actions or make any difference on their own in collaboration with God in their own relationship with the Lord without funding from an outside source. And when that happens, that's really tragic. It mars, I think, our identity and our ability to be just human beings involved in the mission of God. I just, I think it's awful. When you see it, it's awful. Um, so I think that one thing that is really important to talk about in partnerships, especially before they are started, is how to avoid unhealthy dependency. What ideas do the partners have about it? What have they seen happen in their context when there's been unhealthy dependency? What has it looked like? What damage has it caused? Um, how can the project be crafted from the beginning, whatever you're doing together, so that it actually can be done in a sustainable way going forward? And it kind of plays back again to the status issue that we talked about before. Like sometimes just we don't realize the status we bring. into partnerships, often nothing in our culture has prepared us well to listen well to people if maybe they have less education or they have less financial resources. It takes a lot of intentionality to go in as a listener and as a learner and to pay attention to this issue, because I think what happens so often is we don't have the conversation. We have some idea of what type of partnership we want and what we want to accomplish. We go into another cultural context. We try to convince people to do this together. They don't want to tell us that that idea isn't going to work long term because they don't want to embarrass or cause us to lose face. They also don't want to risk not partnering together because they really could use the financial resources. And so they go along with it. Structures are created, a strategy for ministry is created that is not sustainable long term. And then when people can't sustain it, oftentimes the church in North America gets mad and they feel like, well, why don't they just sustain this? Why do we have to keep giving money to this, you know? Well, it wasn't well thought out from the beginning. And so one of the pieces I get frustrated with is when somehow in North America people say we don't want to risk unhealthy dependency, so we're not going to give any money. Well, that's kind of foolish, I think, as well, because we have resources and we need to be stewards of those resources. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times our partners do have really good ideas about how to shape and craft things to avoid unhealthy dependency. And it looks very different in every situation. But if we don't have the conversation, we're almost certain to have the problem later on.
Right, right. Well, we have obviously just scratched the surface of a very complex topic, and I want to remind our listeners of Mary's book, Cross-Cultural Partnerships. The subtitle is Navigating the Complexities of Money and Mission. I wonder if there are other resources in addition to your book that you would recommend for our listeners.
Well, I was thinking of a couple that might be of help, especially for people in churches and mission committees. There's a website for a group called Coalition on the Support of Indigenous Ministries. If people go to that COSM website, they can click on a tab of resources, and there's all kinds of helpful resources there, and they're all free, and they might be beneficial. A small book, but it's very readable and helpful, and I think especially when people on mission committees are busy working a lot in their regular jobs. There's a book by Daniel Rickett called Making Your Partnership Work, and he was involved for many years with Partners International, which does an excellent job with ministry partnerships around the world. And now he's involved with his wife in leading a ministry called She Is Safe that is working with women who are trafficked and in vulnerable situations around the world. So Daniel Rickett has some great resources as well. So those would be a good place to start.
Very good. Well, we want to say thank you again for sharing these ideas with us this afternoon, and to Wycliffe for sharing you with us. It's been a pleasure to have you on the program today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be with you too. I really appreciate what you're creating for people in churches. I think it's going to be very helpful.
We hope you found today's interview to be both informative and inspiring. If you missed anything or would like to check out the resources or links mentioned during the interview, you can find the show notes we've prepared at our website, globalmissionspodcast.com. You can also use the website or our Facebook page to suggest a particular topic or expert you'd like to hear featured on this program. The Global Missions Podcast is co-sponsored by the Jaffrey Centre for Global Initiatives and Send International of Canada. Thanks for listening in. I'm your host, Mags, and I invite you to join us again in 2 weeks when we'll continue to explore this grand adventure of being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.